I'm Shahar Azani, and today I'm pleased again to join David Harris on Defending Israel. 290,000 people. That is the number of supporters who stood up for Israel and for the Jewish people in Washington, D.C. in the rally, with many thousands more joining online, right here on JBS and on other outlets, as Israel continues its military offensive against the evil terror organization Hamas, while still working to get back the 239 hostages, bring them back home, including innocent babies, women, and children. Indeed, trying times for our people. David, I would love to dive straight in with you and talk to you about the rally itself. You were there.
I was there with members of my family, and it was amazing, or to use my children's favorite word, awesome.
Awesome.
And I have to tell you, I've had experience organizing rallies, Shahar, and in particular, what had been the largest gathering of Jews in America, and that was 1987, Freedom Sunday for Soviet Jewry. And I know something about how complicated it is.
Right.
So I want to take my hat off to the organizers of this rally, because we had 36 days to organize in 1987,
right,
and we thought that was nothing. How could we possibly do it in 36 days? They did it in 10 or less. And it was a weekday, and notoriously weekdays are not supposed to be as successful as weekends. It was in Washington, when most Jews live in the New York area, so getting them there was challenging. And my God, all of the pieces to put together with the National Park Police, with the local police, with all the vendors, and they did it. And it worked beautifully. And I'm sure behind the scenes, there always are. But who cares?
Right.
History will deem it a success, the largest gathering of Jews in American history.
Right.
It was amazing.
You know, and such a great message of support, because I can tell you that I received it, I'm sure you have, so many people in Israel who witnessed the rally, who followed, some of them right here through the JBS channel. And they were so touched by this show of support. It really meant the world. How did it feel on the ground? You know, we accompanied it here on the air, but describe the feeling as you were there with the masses. What was the sense like?
Well, so you understand, at 6:30 in the morning, we reported for our bus.
Amazing.
From the Moise Safra Center on the Upper East Side of New York. There were 3 buses that left from there. What was exciting was that as we started to go on the New Jersey Turnpike, you saw other buses, lots of other buses, and you felt this growing sense of community and power. And then everyone descended on the rest stop in Delaware, because that's the midpoint on the route there. And I don't think this rest stop in Delaware had ever seen anything like this. There were prayers going on. There were people asking the intricacies of kosher food at the different vendors. But you saw people coming from all over, and this instant sense of connection.
Right.
And then we arrived at the FedEx field, which is a sports field outside of Washington. We were told there were over 2,000 buses. So as we got off the bus, there were thousands of other people around us. They were young, they were old, they were religious, they were secular. They were covered in flags and sweatshirts with messages and signs. And we went to the metro. It was a real grassroots community effort. And I saw lots of people I knew or vaguely remembered. But even if you didn't, there was no shyness. Oh, where are you from?
Right.
Oh, it's so great to see you here.
Amazing.
Oh, you're from that community? Do you know so-and-so, the Jewish geography game?
Right.
But we felt this strength in numbers,
right,
and shared purpose. And then, of course, we came out of the metro at Smithsonian, and it was just a short walk, and in front of you, the thousands and tens of thousands who arrived before us. Maybe the bus drivers were faster,
right,
or didn't stop in Delaware, or had shorter trips.
Right.
The weather was perfect. The setting was the Capitol building in front and the Washington Monument behind. It doesn't get more iconic.
Right.
And just this sea of people. And the speeches were were all good. I mean, some were particularly memorable, but they were secondary in a way. They were secondary because you felt you were part of history.
Right.
In a previous conversation that you and I had, I had tried to explain to JBS viewers that feeling in the Soviet Jewry rally of 1987.
Right.
People who took buses all night from Boston, people who flew from across the country, even from Canada, from Mexico, and whatever their difficulty in getting there was, or the expense, or the delay, the moment they got there, it was Hineni,
Right.
here I am.
Right.
Hinenu, here we are. And nothing else mattered. So we got home, our family of 4 that was able to travel, after midnight. So it was a 18, 19-hour day, and you know what? We were thrilled. We felt we had experienced something.
Yeah.
And people would be talking about this for years.
What a great sense of together, right? Like you say, beyachad, it's the energy in the air, so needed these days. But I still want to drag you a little bit and ask you specifically. You mentioned memorable, not so memorable. There was one thing that troubled me. I remember a certain
You were
video.
not a speaker, and you should have been a speaker. And I'm going to talk to the organizers.
I remember a video that came out of the White House of the Vice President, Kamala Harris, talking about the plight of Islamophobia. And I did wonder, how come we did not see, I mean, we did see political representatives across the aisle, terrific, very important, but why do you think there was no higher level representation to the administration from the White House? How do you interpret this from your experience in this field?
Well, first of all, since you mention it, let's call it out by name. The Jewish Federations of North America, JFNA, and the Conference of Presidents were the principal organizers.
Right.
They pulled this together. They get the huge shout out, and they get the applause.
Correct.
I don't know what happened behind the curtains, Shahar. In 1987, I do, and I know there's an awful lot of politicking going on.
Right, which is what I'm asking you now. What do you think?
You know, in 1987, in the beginning of the process, we had to try and persuade people to speak. Why should I come? Why should I change my schedule? Why should I to speak?
Right.
As it became clear that this was going to be huge, it reversed itself, and everyone started saying, we want to speak, and if we don't speak, we're going to be angry. And if we don't speak first,
Right.
and if we don't have 10 minutes,
Right.
but why you're offering me 5 minutes?
Right.
I want 10 minutes. And why is he speaking and not me? All of the backroom stuff. I don't know what happened with the White House. I'd like to think that the organizers began by saying, we'd love to have Joe Biden there. After all, we're in Washington. The White House is a few streets away.
Agreed.
He's been terrific on this issue.
Right.
I mean, everyone agrees, Republicans, Democrats, on this issue he's been terrific. If he can't be there for any reason, maybe he's traveling. The Vice President of the United States is here.
Right.
Sure, we'd love to have Kamala Harris here. And if she's not here, maybe Secretary Blinken.
Right.
After all, he has a personal story which he's been more than willing to tell,
Right.
not to mention his role as Secretary of State.
Right.
I don't know what happened. Deborah Lipstadt is a friend. I have great regard for her. I've known her for decades.
Right.
She gave an excellent speech, but there was a question for many. What was the story behind the story?
Right. And you know, you mentioned Soviet Jewry, and of course we had Natan Sharansky there.
And we had Vice President George H.W. Bush.
Right. No, I'm saying like at the rally yesterday.
Oh yes, but
at that rally, the
we
original.
had the Vice President of the
Right.
United States.
Exactly. So, which brings about the question, which is worth noting.
Right.
But also in Sharansky's speech, he mentioned specifically the situation on college campuses.
Right.
And what's happening there. And he mentioned, you know, the calls against Israel, globalize the Intifada, and, you know, the terrible, terrible statements that are being made. But I was surprised that there was no mention of administration of college campuses. I mean, the fact is that the situation on college campuses is not just coming from the direction of students. It's coming from the acquiescence of administration on various college campuses who are unwilling to utter a word. Specifically, we had a situation with MIT, you know, unwilling to act, Harvard and others. What's your take on this?
My take is your take. I think that, look, since October the 7th, and we've discussed this before, Shahar, but it's worth returning.
Yes.
Our world has changed, and it should have changed. And the way I see the world, just as one individual, now is through the prism of how people responded to October 7th. When I say people, I don't just mean individuals. I mean institutions. I mean
let me ask you specifically.
media outlets, political parties, country leaders.
So what do you
everything
think?
has changed.
So let's go through the prism of the rally. We had the Jewish community, we had JFNA, Conference of Presidents, the Jewish organizational world. What should the Jewish organizational world learn from what happened on October 7th? How do you see
Oh my
the lessons?
goodness.
Yes.
We're going to have to do a 10-part series on JBS
Let's start now.
to answer that question. Because let me start this way. If Jewish organizations have learned nothing, or think that this is simply a passing phenomenon and they can return to their earlier, let's call it business model,
Right.
I think they're living in an alternate universe. An alternate universe. I think everything has changed. Where to begin?
Yes.
Number one, we all organizations have to focus much more on young people and on education. We can't assume that someone else in someone else's home or another synagogue or a school is doing the work for us. Our young people
Have we not done that?
or not to the extent necessary. I mean, obviously for those who go to day schools,
Right.
for example, sure, but the vast majority of our children don't go to day schools. Maybe, by the way, more will start going as a result of recent events too.
Right.
As woke culture sort of seeps in everywhere.
Right.
But the basic arguments, how to defend Israel, how to understand anti-Semitism, how to fight anti-Semitism. For so many, it's all so new. And I'm sure I'm just one person, but the number of people who've come to me and said, help me write, help me draft, help me prepare, role play with me.
Right. You know, I want to, this is one point that always troubled me, David, because you're talking about day schools, and you're right. The assumption is that on day schools, especially when you saw the buses at the rally, but the truth is, David, and correct me if I'm wrong here, my instinct is that even our day schoolers and high school, Jewish high schools, are they really ready to answer the tough questions? Because sometimes there is this assumption that if you're going to a day school or yeshiva, then you know how to counter these issues, you don't need to deal with it. But maybe it's important that we ask the tough questions there so that when they go out to the real world or college campuses and elsewhere, they're more equipped.
Absolutely, and you have children in the day school movement,
Yes.
so you know the
Yes.
answer for yourself.
Right.
But they start with one huge advantage, and that is 24/7 pride.
Correct.
They know who they are.
Very true.
Again, I'm generalizing. They're
No, no.
comfortable in their own skin.
True.
And Shahar, I've
is a
always
sense of
believed,
identity.
this goes way back before October 7th. You can't teach Jewish children of any age, 15, 30, my children are already older.
Right.
You can't teach them to fight unless they know what they're fighting for, not just what they're fighting against. You give them the education from the inside out, not from the outside in.
Right.
Don't be a Jew to defy Hitler's memory.
Right.
Be a Jew because you find nourishment,
Right.
enrichment, spiritual meaning, community, a life map, a GPS system for how to live.
Very true.
And once you have that, and you're comfortable and confident in your own skin, then you know what? It's worth taking on the haters. It's worth risking social isolation on campus because you're going to stand up to the mob. But otherwise, why are you standing up to the mob if you don't even know what it is you're defending?
True.
So that's the advantage that many of the products of day schools and strong Jewish educations have. And so for me, the organizations have, all the organizations, and they're all trying to attract more young people, thankfully. But when the young people are in, let's talk about this. Rabbis especially in the non-Orthodox movements, from my experience, have been spending an awful lot of time on tikkun olamism,
Right.
and a little bit less time in some cases on Zionism,
Right.
and Judaism. Again, without giving up the universalism, not at all, heaven forbid.
But like you say, inside out.
But now the messaging from our synagogues, I think, has to be not only how to take care of everyone else in the world, but we're in trouble.
Correct.
We're in trouble.
Yep.
And a third lesson is not everyone that we helped came to help us. You know, I always believed in the principle of reciprocity. I mean, obviously, we did things also because they were ethically and morally correct.
Always.
Obviously, we're Jews.
Right.
We're not signing a contract and demanding a price in return. However, to somehow dispel with the notion of reciprocity on our darkest day, in our darkest weeks, since the Holocaust, we've been looking for those partners, the people we stood with, cooperated with, allied with. Where were they? Where are they?
Right.
And I think institutions need to, in a way, inventory and come to terms with the reality, not the illusion. Well, maybe they were busy, maybe they were distracted. No.
Very true.
This was our 911 moment.
Yeah.
Were they there?
Right.
If they were, hold them close. If they weren't, are they really our allies?
Yeah.
Was the relationship really what we thought it was?
Did we demand of them to come forth?
That's my point. So,
You know, Van Jones said a few words at the rally.
Right.
He said that the Jewish community stood side by side with the black community during the fight for civil rights. Therefore, when he sees the plight of anti-Semitism and that plague throughout the Jewish community in the US, he cannot just stand on the sidelines. And what I wanted to see is, you know, I was happy that he said that, but I wanted to see so many more, you know, African American leaders come forth and stand by what's right. And unfortunately, many of them don't. And we always have this attempt to reach out to build bridges. But like you say, David, it's a very important moment for us that after October 7th, things have to change.
one can also look at the Latino community,
Right.
which is now the largest of the minority communities in the United States, the Asian American communities, and how about perhaps most challengingly, if there's such a word, the Muslim population.
Mm-hmm.
Because a number of Jewish organizations have invested very heavily in all of these relationships.
Correct.
But what happened on October 7th and since? And how will it affect these relationships? Again, I'm not painting with a broad brush stroke. There were people who came forward and who stood up, blessed them, as I said, embraced them. But there were those who didn't, and who either committed the sin, if you will, of silence or complicity. They were either on the other side, or they were in the it's too complicated school. Too complicated to
Right.
condemn Hamas
Right.
or condemn the murder and beheading of babies. Too complicated.
When moral clarity is what's needed now, it's a must. It's not an option. But I want to ask you to take that lesson one step further. And I know it's a topic that I've asked you before, but this is, one of your expertise, which I always indulge hearing. I'm looking at the United Nations, and one of the things that stood out to me was that UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency in Gaza, decried the other day the fact that there is a presence of the IDF military within hospitals in the Gaza Strip. It became an issue in their institutions or in hospitals, which they've never done, ever, in the course of the 17-year dictatorial terrorist regime of Hamas. What should be the approach of the Jewish organizational world vis-a-vis the UN and its organs in light of October 7th?
I'll answer it in just a second, but I want to add one more point, if I may, to your previous question about organizations.
Mm-hmm.
I took the approach in my career that we were swivel-headed. We were strictly nonpartisan, and not just in word, but in practice. But many of our best friends since October 7th have also come from the center-right or the conservative, call it conservative movement.
Right.
People like Douglas Murray has been quite extraordinary.
Extraordinary.
Okay,
Extraordinary.
A non-Jew. I think today, if there were a referendum, he would be chosen as one of the leaders of the Jewish community.
Incredible.
Okay,
He's been incredible.
people like him, Nikki Haley. This is not an endorsement.
No, it's
Ron
reality.
DeSantis.
Right.
Richard Kemp, Colonel Richard Kemp of Britain. These are people who are often viewed as, well, we can't go near them because they're too conservative for us,
Right.
or they're too center-right for us.
Right.
I've always taken the approach that if they're our friends when it matters, I'm not there to give them a litmus test of 10 issues. They were there for us on anti-Semitism.
Thank you
They
for
were there
saying
for
that.
us on Israel.
Yep.
Would the Jewish organizations that I'm thinking about invite them to speak? By the way, alongside others, not in place of,
Right.
but alongside people on the center-left, or not. Are we going to acknowledge our friends or continue to be selective about our friends because they may or may not fit the worldview of some Jewish organizations,
Right.
that have lived in certain places?
Which reminds me, in similar manner, we had Fox News that established a few days ago its own portal online on anti-Semitism.
Right.
Everything that has to do with anti-Semitism. So forget about what you think about politically, just like you say, David, recognize.
Right, so a person in his early 40s, someone I know quite well, comes to me and almost whispers and says, David, I'm starting to watch Fox News. As if, had he spoken a little louder, lightning would have struck.
Right.
and I'm reading the New York Post. What are people going to think of me?
Right.
Well, I also turn on Fox News. I also read the New York Post. By the way, I read lots of things.
Right.
It's one. But acknowledge, it gives me a lot more pleasure to read New York Post than to listen to the BBC today.
Oh, for sure.
Okay? And the New York Post did not have a headline like the New York Times taking the Gaza Ministry of Health report on the hospital.
Correct.
So
Much
all
appreciated.
I'm saying is I'm not trying to move the community from here to here. I'm simply saying we have a better idea of who our friends are and who they're not, Shahar.
Agreed.
And if they come on the center left, God bless them. If they come on the center right, will people still keep their distance?
Right.
I'm swivel-headed, and I hope more people will become the same.
Agreed. And with regards to the
UN.
anything you want to say?
Gilad Erdan, Israel's ambassador to the UN, has said a lot. I think he's even called for the resignation of the Secretary General, which is almost unprecedented.
I mean, he has been, to be honest, Antonio Guterres' position throughout this process has been
shocking.
a sham. Yeah.
I mean, Antonio Guterres
Unacceptable.
was a respected Prime Minister of Portugal. And as I recall, his wife had had some involvement with Jewish historical matters in Portugal. Lovely couple. He has become, as I said in a recent tweet, or ex-post, I should say, but
We're with you.
he's become, in effect, a flag for Hamas.
Correct.
So the fact that the Secretary General cannot even give more than lip service, Shahar, to what happened on October 7th and what it means. The fact that the UN General Assembly member states, 193, have never, ever once condemned Hamas before or since October the 7th. The fact that the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, misnamed as it is, Human Rights Council,
Absolutely, yeah.
maybe Human Wrongs Council, but nonetheless had a moment of silence for the Palestinian victims.
Right.
I can keep going. The World Health Organization, the UN Women's Organization,
Right.
completely, totally ignoring the violation of women, the rape of women, the murder of children. And Gilad Erdan has this
Shameful.
unenviable task of living in the lunatic asylum at this
But
point.
David, finally he's asking, Ambassador Ardan is demanding the resignation of Antonio Guterres. He's, issuing threats about visa revocation of UN officials. I mean, there is a direction, there is a movement in a direction of accountability. Do you sense that as well?
I see it very much a kind of, again, we're going to take off the gloves, roll up the sleeves.
Yes.
And whether it's Ivy League universities,
Yep.
whether it's the New York Times,
Right.
whether it's the BBC,
Right.
whether it's the UN Secretary General, we're not going to take it any longer.
Correct.
You've lost our trust.
Correct.
You've lost our trust. And you know what? We're not going to roll over. We're going to call you out.
Yes.
We're going to inflict as much reputational damage as we possibly can.
Agreed.
We're going to use a favorite word in the UN, we're going to delegitimize you as much as we can,
Right.
because you no longer earned the trust that people have placed in you.
Correct. I know we only have a couple of minutes left, so I'd like to shoot some friendly
Don't
bullets.
shoot.
Friendly bullets at you. Just quick questions, just for the sake of our
Sure.
audience, to set the record straight when it comes to
Sure.
issues. Countries around the world that stood out favorably for you and others that you would criticize after October 7th.
At the Israel rally in Washington, 5 countries were represented by their ambassadors, we were told from the stage. It's important that everyone knows. Cyprus, Greece, North Macedonia, Jamaica, and Guatemala. 5 countries. On one key UN resolution, 4 EU countries voted with Israel when the rest abstained. I have to remember Austria, the Czech Republic, Croatia, and Hungary. More generally, at the top of my list, I have to put the United States. And here again, as a nonpartisan, I have to applaud Joe Biden's leadership to date.
Right.
Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, and Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor of Germany, have been at the top of my list. And my always favorite pro-Israel country in the world, the Czech Republic.
Right.
You can always count on the Czech Republic.
Very true. Disappointed you?
Well, the 5 countries,
Top. We know there are too many, but top.
the 5 countries that pulled their ambassadors from Israel, punishing Israel for having the audacity to respond to attempted genocide.
Right.
Who were the 5 countries?
Who are the 5 countries?
Turkey,
Right.
South Africa,
Shameful.
Colombia, Bolivia, and Chile. And every JBS viewer should know those 5 countries.
Right.
And think twice before traveling, doing business with those 5 countries. They
Correct.
abandoned us.
Leaders around the world that you were inspired by.
Again, I give a lot of credit to Joe Biden. I have to say Hillary Clinton has really come out very, very strongly.
Very true.
I mentioned them before, but I think Nikki Haley,
Right.
Ron DeSantis, Mike Pompeo on the other side of the aisle have been outstanding. Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, of course. The Prime Minister of Britain, the Chancellor of Germany again. Disappointments,
Yes.
though. I put the Secretary General of the UN at the top of my list.
Top.
Top of my list,
True.
Barack Obama. Big disappointment. He became an equivocator.
Right.
It's the complexity school.
Yeah.
After first condemning what happened on October 7th,
Contextualized.
he couldn't stop.
Right.
He couldn't stop. Universities, I'm a trustee of Brandeis University, so I say it in full disclosure, President Ron Leibowitz has set a standard for how to respond. Ben Sass at the University of Florida has set a standard for how to respond.
Right.
And too many universities, you mentioned MIT, Cornell, Harvard, Penn, Cooper Union, and others have shown us how not to respond.
I love it because you mentioned to our viewers it's time to take names, and that's exactly what you're doing. And good for you. And I hope each and every one of us, each and every one of you, our viewers, you take the lesson of everything that you're hearing now. And remember, there are consequences to taking the immoral position when it comes to this, David.
Again, my plea is self-respect.
Yep.
Jews should no longer roll over and always play the good guy. we want to. Obviously, we do. We hope for the world when, again, it's possible. But when you report blood libels, when you equivocate in the face of genocide, when you remain silent, having said never again at every Holocaust commemoration, but when never again is again
on your doorstep,
where are you?
Correct.
Then we're going to call you out. We're going to call you out because October 7th was our September 11th times 10, times 20, times 30. And if you're going to show up on January 27th for International Holocaust Remembrance Day looking for applause and approval when you were missing on the real next Holocaust Day of October 7th,
right,
don't expect a warm welcome.
Very good, very good. What can I say? To use your children's words, that was awesome. Another awesome conversation. I really thank you for, your perspective, your wisdom, your guidance on these issues. It's really a clarion call for everyone who asks themselves today, what should we do and how should we feel about everything that's happening? So thank you for that.
And you know what? The best source of news today, I mentioned the New York Post and other places, is JBS.
Correct.
And viewers should understand that this has become the public square of the American Jewish community. This is where they can get 24/7 information, understanding, analysis, sympathetically, honestly, accurately. JBS should become the address of choice.
Very true. And factually, these still exist, right? Facts. Thank you so much, David. As always, such a pleasure to listen to the enthusiasm, incredible words of guidance and support for our community that benefits us all. We all pray here at JBS and throughout our communities that all Israeli hostages are home soon, as it was echoed so well at the rally. Bring them back home now. And to you, our viewers, it's always good to be together, especially these days, as we here at JBS will continue to cover all that's happening before, through, and long after this war ends successfully for the people of the state of Israel and for the Jewish people. But may we see better times soon, as we always conclude, David,
Am Yisrael Chai.
Chai. Thank you so much.